Well, hey, good morning. I know we said it earlier, but Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. It feels like it has been a while since we have all been together, and I am so grateful that you are here, whether you are here in person or you're joining us online, as we get ourselves started moving into 2024. And as I was not just putting together this week's sermon, but the series that we're going to be in for the next 3 weeks, I was acutely aware of the time of year, that it is New Year's, and it's a really big deal that the title of this morning's message is Hit the Ground Waiting. And I say that because if I was going to share with you the message that would come most naturally to me this time of year, it would be called Hit the Ground Running, not Hit the Ground Waiting. I am one of those people who absolutely loves everything about the start of a new year, right? Whether you want to call it like new year, new you, whether you want to see this as a fresh start, a season of new beginnings, whether you want to see this as a season where culturally most people focus on some kind of personal growth and change, or whether you're one of those people that just loves to sit down with a journal and list out your goals and your plans and your vision for the year. And some of you are looking at me like that seems like an exercise in torture, and others of you are looking at me with a smile that you're like, I love that too. You have found time to sit down and start to list out financial goals and career goals and relational goals and things that are going to happen and trips you want to take and parts of the house you want to fix up and all of that kind of stuff. And I just want you to know I am like 100% with you. What I want to do this time of year is hit the ground running. And I also feel that for our church, not just because of your incredible generosity with our resources in the month of December, but just this sense that God is moving, that God is at work, connecting us with one another, giving us this increased desire to become more like Jesus, and giving us this increased sense that God has brought us together as a community in this city to accomplish some specific work for the glory of His name. And I believe that. I believe that God has a lot in store for us as a church in 2024. Things that we are going to be able to do by His grace and for His glory that are going to make a really big impact on our lives, the lives of people in our neighborhood, and the lives of people that we have yet to meet. And I can't wait for all of it. Yet, as much as I'm ready to go, as much as I want to preach a vision series and launch some new initiatives and some programs and all that kind of stuff, as much as I want to do that, over the last couple of weeks, I have had this really clear sense that God is inviting all of us, both as a church and individually, into a 3-week season where we would choose to intentionally start 2024 by waiting on Him. And the vision for that comes out of Psalm 62, verse 1, that just says so simply, Wes read it just a few minutes ago, "For God alone my soul waits in silence." And in response to that one very simple idea, as a community, we are going to devote the next 21 days to deepening, strengthening, exploring, maybe even developing our prayer lives. We're going to do it as a church, and we're going to do it individually. At least I hope we're going to do it individually. A lot of what it looks like for you personally, that's going to be between you and the Spirit of God. Maybe this is a 3-week period of time where you choose to set the alarm clock a little bit earlier so that you can get up and spend time with God before the day starts. Or maybe even easier and more realistic, it's just a 3-week period where you don't set the alarm clock any earlier. You just break up with the snooze button and you're like, oh, I know, when it goes off, I'll just get up and then I will have time to pray with God. Maybe it's a 3-week season where you choose to turn the TV off in the evening and put your phone down so that you can end your day with Jesus. A lot of this is going to be a personal journey, but there are also going to be plenty of times that we come together in different ways and forms as a church to devote ourselves to this work of prayer. And Wes is going to tell you more about that, or at least part of it, at the end of our time together today. But what I want to do with the majority of our time here is lay a spiritual foundation for why it is that we're doing this. I want to, in a sense, make my case for why I think you should jump into a 21-day focus on prayer with us. And the whole argument is going to come out of that first verse in Psalm 62, because I believe ultimately what David is asking us to do through a series of waiting is to create space for what matters most. Right? We're not starting the year with 21 days of prayer in some attempt to appease God. Jesus has already done that on our behalf on the cross. We're not doing this as a form of saying, hey, I need to work off some of the sin of 2023 or some of the sin of New Year's Eve. And oh yeah, 21 days where I'm like really intentional about doing spiritually good stuff. That's exactly what it would take to please God. That's not what the gospel calls us to at all. The gospel tells us that we are loved by God because of what Jesus has done on the cross. This isn't 21 days of like spiritual calisthenics so we can have a deeper impact. This is 21 days of us creating space for what matters most. It's 21 days of us creating space to care for our souls, right? This first verse, for God alone my soul waits in silence, makes it abundantly clear that David is intentionally choosing to focus on the health and needs of his soul. This is David, the great king of Israel, and although we don't know specifically when he writes Psalm 62, it's clear that he writes it at some point when he is on the throne. So here is a man who is busy, who has a lot going on, has a lot on his shoulders, and he is choosing to focus on the health and the need of his soul. In doing that, he's choosing to honor the importance of this thing that we call the soul. And at the risk of being overly simplistic, I thought it might be helpful for us to take just a minute or two to define what do we actually mean when we talk about the soul. And sort of the quickest version of that I can give you goes back to something that Jesus taught. Jesus calls all of us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So if you were to ask me biblically, what does it mean to be a human? It means that you are a combination of heart, soul, mind, and strength. You have a body, physical body. You have a mind. We learn more with each passing month how interconnected those two things are. And I would argue the best way to understand the heart is it is the intersection of your body and your brain. Your body and your mind comes together to form your heart, the seat of emotion, the seat of desire, the seat of longing. In a sense, that's the physical side of you, but there is this other side. There is this other side that we would call your soul. It is the essence of who you are as a human. It is the part of you that has the ability to connect with and to commune with God himself. You are body and soul. You are born of the dust of the earth and the very breath of God. You are born of water and spirit. And what we tend to do is to neglect our souls. And David is going to show us the danger of that. But before we get to what David wants to say, I want to read what is less a definition of our soul and more a description that helps capture the importance of the soul and the role that the soul plays in our life. It comes from a spiritual writer named Ruth Haley Barton. And she writes about the soul saying, when she talks about the soul, I'm talking about the part of you that is most real. The very essence of you that God knew before he brought you forth in physical form. The part that will exist after your body goes into the ground. And yes, ultimately in heaven you will have a glorified body, but she is making the point that your soul is the most eternal part of you. This is the you that exists beyond any role you play, any job you perform, any relationship that seems to define you, or any notoriety or success you may have achieved. It is the part of you that longs for more of God than you have right now. The part that may, even now, be aware of missing God amid the challenges of life. We want to take 21 days to care for the needs of our soul. And David knows the importance of this. Now, here's why this is so significant and why it's so relevant to us. Like I said a few minutes ago, we don't know exactly when David wrote this psalm. Different theologians have different ideas, but it's all largely a matter of speculation. What we do know, though, not just that he's king, but we do know that he writes it in the midst of a season of political crisis. Right? This idea of for God alone, my soul waits in silence. He doesn't write it while he's on some kind of spiritual retreat. This is not reflections from David while he's vacationing on the Mediterranean, right? Which is really helpful for me, because when I think for God alone, my soul waits in silence, maybe it's just the time of year, but I picture like a cold winter morning and a roaring wood fire and a good cup of coffee, and the kids still in bed, and a quiet house. And I'm like, oh, good, now that everything's peaceful, now come on, God, do your thing. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. But that's not where David is. Look at verse 3 and 4. How long will all of you attack a man to batter him? David is, by the way, the man. David feels like a leaning wall or a tottering fence. It's like he's on the verge of collapsing, whether that means abdicating the throne or whatever he has in mind. His enemies feel like we've got David on the run. We've got David on the ropes, and if we just keep pushing, we could take this guy down a couple of pegs. His enemies only plan to thrust him down from his high position. They take pleasure in falsehood. There is some kind of dishonesty that's coming after David. And then here, maybe the most scary part, they bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. There is this sense in David that there are people out to get him, they're lying about him, and maybe worst of all, he doesn't actually know who to trust. Because when everybody comes in to see him, they're like, oh yeah, your majesty, great to see you, I'm your guy. But obviously, some of the people that are coming in and greeting him so respectfully in his throne room are conspiring against him behind his back, and he doesn't know who he can trust. And it's in that season that David says, you know what? If I'm going to get through this, I really need to pay attention to what's going on inside of me. In many ways, what he does is the polar opposite of what we have been conditioned to do. Right? We look at our lives and we look at these sort of big buckets of our lives and we think, okay, 2024, this is going to be my opportunity to get my financial house in order. This is going to be my opportunity for some relational goals, for some career goals. This is going to be my opportunity to do and accomplish some stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. Don't hear me incorrectly on that. I'm not criticizing that, but I'm saying that the mistake we make, and it is a mistake, is to say, I know I'm going to focus on all that stuff, and then once I get all that stuff where I need it to be, once I get all of that lined up, then I will have bought myself some space, and I can do all this God alone stuff and take care of my heart and take care of my soul. And it absolutely never works. It's just a question of which way it's not going to work for you, right? Jesus says in Mark chapter 8, verse 36, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and then forfeit his soul? So in some ways, probably the worst thing that could happen to you in 2024, probably the thing I most pray doesn't happen for any of us, is that we would crush all of our other goals in 2024, but somehow in the process end up crushing our own souls. Right? That we would crush all these other goals, but crush the part that is most real about us. Because at the end of the day, the arc of your 2024 is going to be more defined by your soul than anything else. Now, in some ways, the ironic good news is that the odds of you succeeding and crushing all of those other goals while you neglect your soul are actually tremendously low, right? That's probably not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that you're going to fall short, right? Because it wasn't like you weren't trying in 2023. It wasn't like your New Year's resolution was like in 2023, you're like, I know, I'm going to devote 365 days to totally screwing up my life so that I can write a really good comeback story in 2024. Yeah, that'll be awesome. Let's just do it that way. No, that's not anybody's story, right? So what's likely is that we are going to spin our wheels in futility because we're trying to live our life from the outside in, and the scripture calls us to live from the inside out. Proverbs 4:23, keep your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. And yes, heart and soul, the way I would understand them, are different, but they connect so deeply that the idea is extraordinarily relevant. You got to watch over your heart if you want to see transformation in your relationships. You got to watch over your heart if you want to see something new and different at work. Out of the heart, the mouth speaks. You got to watch over your heart if you want to see something different in your patterns of consumption and spending. You got to watch over your heart. So we're creating 21 days to do that. We're also creating 21 days to create space to encounter God, which is easy to overlook in this psalm, but absolutely central to what David is arguing. Look, I get it. When I talk about creating 21 days to create some space to care for our souls, that's language that I would guess resonates with a lot of us, right? Ideas about self-care and self-leadership, even ideas about mindfulness and developing a meditative practice to kind of combat stress and anxiety, that's all very much in vogue today, and that's a good thing. It's good that culturally we're becoming more comfortable talking about the importance of emotional and relational health. That's all good. But it doesn't do us very much good if we create space to surface needs within our own soul. Do we become aware of things in our own soul and then have absolutely no idea what to do with what we find? Right? It doesn't do much good if we, kind of dig in and do this work and are like, wait a minute, so many of the destructive patterns in my life come from this deep-seated sense of loneliness and this lack of relational connection, and I constantly question my value and my worth, and my life is just drenched in shame. And it is progress to be able to say that or some version of that, but it's a devastating form of progress if you get to the point where you're like, wait, my whole life is controlled by shame, and wait a minute, I have no idea what to do with that. If we're going to care for our souls, we need to know what our souls need most. And David answers it so clearly. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. What he's saying is that you could make $5 million in 2024, and it won't satisfy your soul anywhere near as much as a daily time with God will. Which is, if you believe that, that's a pretty stunning claim. Because I'm guessing for the majority of us, if you knew you were going to make $5 million in 2024, you'd walk out of here in a pretty good mood today. You're like, I like church. Church was good. I'm going to go back next week. I'm in. You would not be sad going home if you knew from God $5 million coming your way this year. But here's the question. Do you believe what I just said? That even if that happened, it would not satisfy your soul. Well, that was unexpected. Let's see if that happens again. It would not satisfy your soul anywhere near as much as a daily time with God. Or if $5 million's not your thing, maybe getting a date, finding a spouse, having a kid, changing jobs, moving, all good things. Again, I'm not criticizing that. But it wouldn't satisfy your soul quite the same way that a daily time with God would. Now, here's why I think that's incredible. You may not have the ability to earn $5 million this year, but you do have the ability to carve out time with God every single day. It's actually within your control to do the thing that would satisfy your soul the most. It's really easy for us to overlook that point, and that would have deeply saddened David, because that's the center of what he's arguing. I was thinking about different ways to kind of make this clear, and I want to try something that we don't do all that often, but I want to put up on the screen Psalm 62 in the original Hebrew as David would have written it. This is actually what it would have looked like. Couple of quick notes just to orient us. Some of you are super detail-oriented, and you're like, wait, it's 13 verses in Hebrew. Why is it only 12 in my English Bible? Am I getting robbed? Am I getting cheated? Here's the deal. The first verse in your English Bible, it's usually smaller font, little italics. It's kind of a preamble. This is the one that says, for the leader from Jethun, a psalm of David, just kind of setting the whole thing up. English translations have kind of taken that out of the text of the psalm itself, and there's some good reasons for that. In Hebrew, they didn't have the ability to do that because it wasn't until later that we actually added in verse numbers and all that. So that little italics part, they would have just started the psalm that way. So you're not getting cheated in the English. The other thing you need to know, and I'm not smart enough to do this if I don't turn my back to you, in English, we read from left to right. Hebrew goes right to left. And even with that, you're like, man, I don't understand that. I don't know what all that is about. And I totally get that. But what I want to do next is add in some highlights that draw your attention to how verse 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and 10 all start. They all start with this teeny little Hebrew word, ak, which can only be translated one of two ways, alone or only. For God alone. For God alone. That's actually David's point. The way he would have to emphasize the center of his argument is to bring a word repetitiously to the front of the verse in the Hebrew construction. And it would have made it abundantly clear to everybody reading this psalm that, yes, David is worried about the needs and desires of his soul, but what he is trying to communicate is where we go to get those needs and desires met. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. For God alone. One of the biggest mistakes that we can make is turning God into someone that we pursue as a means towards another end. All right, and I want to be careful with this because there are ends in your life that matter deeply to God. God cares about your physical health. He cares about your desire to have a child. He cares about your desire to be married. He cares about your finances. He cares about your situation at work. He's not indifferent to those things. It's really subtle, but we need to be careful that we are not just coming to God because we've decided He's our best shot at getting the new job. We're not just coming to God because we've decided He's our best shot at the marriage working. He probably is the best shot, and He's going to be central to that conversation. But what we want to do is to seek God because we believe that He and He alone satisfies our soul. Whether we get the job or not. Whether we move or not. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. And just as we conclude, I want to be careful to say that there's a lot of this that is very introspective, heart-level formation work. But David isn't approaching this in a way that's like, look, my world's falling apart. I could very well lose my throne. Whatever, who cares? I'm just going to sit over here and have like a really good quiet time with God, and my soul's going to be at rest in God while everything falls apart. No, in a sense, everything he's doing his confidence to carve out time to care for his soul, his confidence to carve out time to encounter God rests on the fact that he believes he is also creating space for God to work. Right? He is expecting that this supernatural God has the power and the desire to work and bring about real change in the natural world. Let's read all of verse 1 and 2. For God alone, my soul waits in silence, wouldn't kill me if by now you've got that sort of ingrained in your heart and your mind. From him comes my salvation. He's talking about a spiritual salvation, but he's also talking about deliverance from whatever this political crisis is for him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. He's going to defend me. He's going to protect me from the lies that are swirling around me. I shall not be greatly shaken. Whatever this is that's coming at David, David has a sense it's not going to work, not because of my political savvy and acumen. It's not going to work because God Almighty is going to defend me. Verse 5, for God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him. There's some repetition, some parallelism in there. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. He's coming back around the same idea again. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my salvation and my glory. That word glory could also be translated honor, and that might be more appropriate. David is trusting that God is going to defend his reputation. He's saying somehow you're going to work, that they're going to understand that all these lies about me are not true. He's my mighty rock. My refuge is God. His whole approach is shaped by the belief that God has the ability and the desire to work on his behalf. And the question is whether or not we are willing to open up space for God to do the same on our behalf. To open up space for God to work as we wait. Now, here's the trick. Waiting in the Bible comes in one of two different forms. It often means, like it does here in Psalm 62, a period of deliberate inactivity, where God says, just don't do anything. Just pause and I'll take care of it. Think about Israel, Red Sea, where God says, hang on, I'm going to fight your battle for you. Think about God asking Saul not to offer sacrifices, but to wait until one of the priests can come to do it. There are many times where God says, hey, as an exercise in trust, I want you to stop and let me work. And there's no doubt that's the harder one for us. But there is also a form of waiting that looks a lot like persistence. It's the form of waiting that says, I'm going to keep praying even though I don't see an answer on the horizon anytime soon. I'm going to keep praying for that friend or family member who's running from God. I'm going to keep praying for the family member who's facing a health challenge, even though the reports have not been good. I'm not going to give up on the friend who desperately needs Jesus and is fighting against his grace and mercy. Right? So I want to be clear. It's not 21 days of like, stop, halt the spiritual presses. We're not doing anything. Because for some of us, waiting means continuing to show up in the belief that God is honoring your commitment to keep doing the things that he's called you to do. Part of waiting can be, I want a new job, but I'm going to show up every single day and do the best I can as unto the Lord. And that's going to be a form of spiritual waiting, saying, God, satisfy my soul, and I'm going to do a good job, but I'm going to keep showing up. I'm going to keep doing what you've asked me to do. So it's not a clear one-size-fits-all, here's what you go do. It's part of why we would do something like create 21 days to seek God and say, hey, are there places in my life where you're calling me to deliberate inactivity? Or are there places in my life where you're calling me to persistent activity? But guys, here's the idea. I don't want us to miss out in 2024 on what matters most. Let's take 21 days to prioritize our souls, to encounter God, to give him a little bit of space to work. Let's see what he has for us. And then it's time to hit the ground running. But for now, let's just take a minute to sit quietly before the Lord and to prepare our hearts as John Michael comes down to lead us in taking communion together.